Welcome everybody to the final event of this year's virtual Windsor Festival. We are here at the Old Court, the Community Arts Centre in Windsor, and I'm thrilled to welcome Hugo Vickers to talk with us this afternoon. Hugo very kindly has put together a special talk just for us about the Queen and the Crown. And in this, I believe you're going to talk a little bit about the royal family and then give us a bit of a critique about the series, The Crown, and delve into the role of fact versus fiction through that which that series has presented. And we're very much looking forward to it, and we hope that you all enjoy this wonderful talk. Hugo, thank you very much indeed.
Well, thank you very much, Martin. It's a great pleasure to be back talking to the Windsor Festival. As you probably know, I'm one of the lucky ones who survived from literally the second day that the Windsor Festival started back in September 1969, which is a very long time ago now. Even I would venture to say, as I've sometimes said before our director was even a worried look on his father's face. He didn't even exist back in 1969. But there we are. I had to score that little point. It's a great pleasure to be talking to you. And what I wanted to do this afternoon was to talk a little bit about the Queen, the role of the royal family, one or two things to do with that, and then also to look at the Netflix series of The Crown. Now, most people very much enjoy the Netflix series, and I don't, and I'll explain why I don't later on, and see what you think. At any rate, I also, of course, have this big challenge of talking to you without knowing how you're responding at all, and I don't have a laugh machine to press a button every now and again when I think people should be laughing, but I'll do my best. I do want to talk a bit about the Queen. I have always thought that if we were looking for an epithet to describe her, Elizabeth the Steadfast would be a good one, because she has always known precisely what it is that she needs to do to be our Queen, and she has always gone directly and straight forward, despite sometimes criticism from the media and implications to do things in a different way, but she's always had a very sound knowledge of what it is to be our Queen. And the other, perhaps, epithet which would be very important, which I think is a key feature of the reign, is she could be called Elizabeth the Conciliator, because she has done so much in the course of her reign to conciliate with countries. Obviously, most recently we think about Ireland, and that would be in people's minds, but don't forget that years and years ago, Germany needed to have good relations with them, and she invited President Heuss over here in 1958. She went to Germany on a long trip, about 10 or 12 days in 1965, visiting the different parts of the country. And then there was the conciliation with Japan when Emperor Hirohito came here, and she went famously in 1975 to Japan. All these things are ways of moving things forward diplomatically, putting behind us the horrors of the past, if you like, and trying to make it a better place for everybody. And then, of course, at that point can come in the politicians and other people. But what the Queen has been brilliant at doing is literally just moving things forward and not sort of dwelling in any sense on the sometimes difficult past relations we've had with these different countries. And she's also been to places like China and Russia, which she never thought she would be able to visit. And so I think that's one of the reasons why it's so incredibly effective if the Queen, say, goes to visit the survivors at Grenfell Tower. She brings with her all these other things that she's done, and she's not going there for political reasons. She's going there to comfort her people, and I'll say a little bit more about that later on. Also, from time to time, I am asked to talk about the Queen as head of state and so forth. I think it's very important that the head of state is above politics, because that means to say that you can respect the head of state without worrying about political affiliations. You may not like the Prime Minister, you can vote him out next time, but the Queen is going to be there, and she's above all that. So we can all respect her as well we should. And of course, sometimes I have these debates against Tarsum, I say Tarsum, not very many of them, Republicans, who talk about, the role of the monarchy and so forth. And there's really one very simple, blinding argument, which is, think of the countries of the world that would not wish to have a head of state like ours, somebody who has served for 68 years this country. When you think of the heads of state that other countries get, we are extremely lucky, and extremely lucky to have the Queen. And now one of the reasons, of course, why the trying to move this on. One of the reasons why a hereditary monarchy works so well, in a sense, is that we do know where the Queen comes from. We've known the Queen since she was a little girl. Here you see a picture of her with her sister, Princess Margaret. We have been able to follow the Queen's life right from the cradle onwards. We've seen her in her little car going around as a little girl, and we've watched her grow up. And so we know where she's come from, and she hasn't risen like politicians up the greasy pole of politics, cutting people down on the way up and so forth. She arrives there by this extraordinary accident of birth. Now, you might not create a hereditary monarchy if you were inventing a system today. We've got one, and it works pretty well, I reckon. And again, you see pictures of her when she was a girl guide, just before the war and during the war. And of course, she went on to serve towards the end of the war. And afterwards, in 1947, the King and Queen, Princess Elizabeth and Princess Margaret, went to South Africa, where she made her famous broadcast in which she dedicated her entire life, whether it be long or short, to the service of this country and what in those days she called the Empire, which has morphed very satisfactorily into the Commonwealth. Now, she became Queen in 1952 at the age of 25 when George VI died. As I say, she's a constitutional monarch above politics. What is interesting is that even in those very early days, her first private secretary, Sir Alan Lascelles, Tommy Lascelles, said that if you presented the Queen with three alternatives, she instinctively always chose the right one. She's had very good sort of common sense guidance over various different issues. She's very dutiful. She's got a very good memory, which I think is an important thing if you're a head of state. She absorbs all the material that she's given. She's extremely conscientious. I would say that probably one of the things that has guided her through her reign is wanting to be a good successor to her father. And in that respect, she's clearly fulfilled everything that he would ever wish. And, supposing there comes a time when she meets him in another life, she'll be able to look him straight in the face and he will be able to say, thank you for a job well done. And she has been amazingly conscientious, which I think is great. Now, one of the most important things about our monarchy, as opposed to the European monarchies, is that the Queen is an anointed Queen. Here you see her about to be anointed, which is in fact the most important part of the coronation ceremony. Okay, she signs various documents, and she is of course later crowned. But by being anointed, that means it's a little bit like being confirmed into the Church of England or welcomed into the other religions which people take on at a certain age. You see 4 Knights of the Garter holding a canopy over the Queen as a very private moment, and when they televised the coronation service, this bit was not shown. The cameras diverted themselves, and she wears a very simple dress. It's actually placed over the coronation gown, and the Archbishop anoints her with holy oil. And that, in a way, is why she will always be our Queen. She will not abdicate. That is absolutely out of the question, and it's actually not needed either in our constitution. So we will leave abdicating to people like Emperor Akihito of Japan, to Queen Beatrix of the Netherlands, King Albert of the Belgians, King Juan Carlos of Spain, and indeed even Pope Benedict. All of these figures have abdicated. Now, I suppose arguably, against what I was saying, probably Pope Benedict is in fact anointed in some way. I'm not a great expert on how they create popes, but anyway, he he did step down. But the Queen will not do so. And goodness me, there have been times in the history of the monarchy when we have really needed a sovereign to speak to us, to guide us. I'm thinking very much particularly of the wonderful work that King George and Queen Elizabeth, later the Queen Mother, did during the war. And I think you'll agree that when the Queen spoke to us from Windsor Castle, from what they call her bubble, back in April, 4 times as many people watched that broadcast as watched the Christmas broadcast. And it was an absolute occasion when it was the head of state who could speak to us very calmly and very moderately, telling us what we could do to contribute a little bit, and throwing in a measured way, that wonderful line, which nobody else could possibly do, reminding us that she had made another broadcast from Windsor Castle, I think it was from the castle, 80 years before, during the war. I mean, how many people can say that? And 80 years later, there she is talking to us again. And I think many people were very reassured by seeing the Queen at that point. I myself said, when asked a little bit about this, that it was very important. We need to know that our Queen is safe, and that's why it was very important that she should be in her bubble at Windsor Castle. But I mean, I'm sure you'll agree with me, she adopted the new techniques of Zoom and all sorts of things incredibly effectively. And of course, she's been ably supported by her family, Prince of Wales and Princess Royal, during this time. Our patron, the Earl of Wessex and the Countess of Wessex, have been very much to the fore. We've seen a lot of them. Prince Edward spoke to us when they did the first clapping for the NHS. The Cambridges have been zooming away like mad, and I certainly have been listening a lot to what they said. They've been going into the different organisations and supporting them. This has been very successful, and all this at a time, of course, when the royal family really couldn't get out and about, and of course now, of course, some of the younger ones are getting out and about much more than before. And I don't know about you, but I was incredibly moved also by seeing the little Cambridge children. And I thought to myself, there they are, they'll always remember this. They are clapping for the NHS. They are engaging for the very first time in public life, a role of service which the royal family does so incredibly well. And I think that's all very moving. I don't want to be controversial, but I think less successful has been what has been happening with the Duke and Duchess of Sussex, an American who married into the royal family. I mean, just a lot of people have tried to say there's a similar situation to what happened way back in 1936 with Edward and Mrs. Simpson. Of course, it's not the same at all. But just to tell you a little bit about what I think happened with Edward and Mrs. Simpson, the king, I've read virtually everything I can on what he thought about being Prince of Wales and so forth, and all the letters to Frida Dudley Ward, things like that. There's plenty of evidence that he really wanted to escape. And unless I'm very much mistaken, even subconsciously, even if he didn't recognize this to himself, he found in Mrs. Simpson an escape route. He cannot have possibly thought in his heart of hearts that the government was going to accept a twice-divorced American as queen in those days. And of course, off he went. And the only people I can promise you, the only person who wanted the king to abdicate, if anyone did at all really, was the king himself. Not Baldwin, not Lascelles, not Harding, none of the people that are blamed with this, not Queen Mary, certainly not King George VI, who had to take over without any training whatsoever. But the Duke of Windsor headed off to what turned out to be a self-imposed exile. Having gone, he then thought how nice it would be to return to Fort Belvedere very much on his own terms, reinvent himself as a younger brother of the king, and no doubt undertake a few engagements here and there as it suited him. It was not, of course, possible to have two kings in the same country. And as it turned out, what happened was that the Duke of Windsor said that he would not come back unless the Duchess was received by the King and Queen. This was recorded in the court circular, and that she was given the title of Royal Highness, to which the royal family basically just said, well, quite so, we'll just leave it at that. And so he remained in self-imposed exile evermore. He lived in Paris with the Duchess of Windsor. And to be absolutely honest, she's a very much maligned person, but she didn't want him to abdicate. She was horrified by it, but she jolly well looked after him. He ate much better food in more beautiful surroundings in the second half of his life than he ever did in the first half. And she had to basically look after a man who, up until December 1936, had everything done for him, everything planned, every minute of his day organised. After that, he had nothing to do, and it was her job to take care of him. And she did a pretty good job. But I quite often, that's the house in Paris where they lived in some elegance. I quite often show this picture, these two pictures together. The Duke of Windsor, who took the path of perceived happiness, and our Queen, who always followed the line of duty. Some journalist once wrote, she has the level gaze, conscious of duty fulfilled. And there's the Duke of Windsor with dead eyes, age 70, and there is our Queen with sparkling eyes. And I'm afraid in schools, I rather pompously advise the children, if ever you have to choose between what you think is happiness and duty, always choose duty. It will make you happier in the long run. And I'm afraid that is probably true. Now, this brings us on to what is happening with the Sussexes. There has been a transformation, if you think about it, from Prince Harry in a splendid uniform to Prince Harry, as we sometimes see him these days, coming off with a wild beard and a woolly hat. And I know they've just secured an incredible Netflix deal, for better or for worse, but basically that is what he used to be, and this is what he now is. And my question is, how are you going to market that? It's not a very happy situation. At the time when our royal family were buckling down and doing their bit selflessly and working in the cause of the nation, it seemed to me that the Sussexes had gone off and they were flying off in a private jet to Los Angeles, setting themselves up in a big house and starting to create these various deals. And one or two things we need to look at, which happened over the last few months, and which, in a sense, if you unpick it, you might see a pattern forming with Meghan Markle. Her father, I have listened to virtually every talk he has done on the television. He's clearly a broken man now and a very unhappy man. I don't think he's ever really said anything untoward or unkind or malicious at all. He's very measured in what he says, but he's obviously extremely unhappy. I ask you this, it's a very odd situation that Prince Harry never met a Mr. Markle. There were plenty of opportunities for that to happen, and there can only, I'm afraid, be one reason, which is that his daughter stopped this from happening. Why did she do that? Was she ashamed of him? Had he done something to her or her mother that which we don't know about, which made it impossible for her to have relations with him? Did she perhaps not want him to say something to Prince Harry about her that might put Prince Harry off? I don't know, but it's a very unhappy situation. And I'm afraid, basically, she has dumped him, and that is what she does, because with the first husband, Trevor Engelson, once she moved to Toronto to go into Suits, he was just dumped. And also she dumped her Canadian chef boyfriend, Corey Vitello. And the interesting thing about both of these gentlemen is that neither of them has ever said a thing since that happened, which is greatly to their credit. The wedding, that also was an extraordinary thing. I ask you to think a little bit about what happened. She left Cliveden with her mother in a car. Her mother got out at the castle. She went down to St George's Chapel. She did her Julie Andrews' Sound of Music solitary walk up the aisle, to be met by, as it were, her father, but as it turns out, the Prince of Wales, to do the last little walk through the choir to the altar. Now, I just ask you this question: is that the first suggestion that was ever put, or is that perhaps some kind of compromise that was made after yells and screams on all sides? And I think I know the answer to that one. The other thing which was very strange was the whole thing about her mother. I mean, why was her mother there all by herself? I mean, everybody thought the mother was wonderful. She looked as though she'd been doing it every day of her life. She behaved with enormous dignity. She was beautifully dressed. I think she came out of it brilliantly. But if you'd been the mother's friend, in the yoga institute where she worked in Los Angeles. Wouldn't you have wanted to come along as her plus one? Clearly, the daughter also thought that it was important that the mother should come on her own. I don't know why she thought that, but it's worrying. It's not natural. And so I'm afraid when we now see what's happened with them going off, it seems to me that there was trouble brewing from quite early on. And so I promise you I'll move on from this topic, but this is what you get now. You've had Prince Harry in South America. He's been turned into a mermaid, and you get, I think, basically a very unhappy man. And many years ago there used to be a program on the television called Cathy Come Home, and my message would be, Harry come home. I think we would have really liked to have heard from Prince Harry during the time of COVID. I think a few words from him to the troops would have been good. I think we would have listened to him. I think he'd got a wonderful niche in this country. And the two of them actually were doing a fantastic job in the Commonwealth. They both were engaged with the Commonwealth, and if I'd been arranging their programme, I would have had them in perpetual orbit going around the Commonwealth and doing good to that very, very important organisation. We don't know what's going to happen, but I can't see it ending very well. Let us move on to the Crown. There is Claire Foy in the Crown, and there is Claire Foy again. I personally thought that Claire Foy did a very good job of representing the Queen. I thought she got the Queen's theatrical timing very well. She looked very like the Queen. She was very likeable as the Queen. I think she did a fantastic job. Let me just tell you why it is that I don't like The Crown. The Crown is lavishly produced. It has wonderful actors in it. It is beautifully filmed in incredible locations. By and large, though with a few exceptions, the details of costume and outfits and uniforms and things are pretty good as well. So it is a very impressive production. The reason that I don't like it is because it represents real people, and it very often puts them into fake situations. And so basically, I think it is fundamentally dishonest. And what they do is they cook up conflict where no conflict existed. And I can see why they do that. It would be very boring without conflict. You have to have a bit of conflict. But fiction surely should help illuminate the truth. It can do that. Shakespeare and all sorts of people have put kings into fictional situations. And sometimes, even with the Queen film, which is where this sort of came from, I think that some of the details of that film were very wrong, but somehow an essence kind of came through, and it helped you to understand a little bit what the Queen was going through during those difficult days in 1997. But it should not pervert the truth, and that's what The Crown does. To the point, and I'll give you one or two examples as we go on, that actually documentary makers have come to me and said, you know, we want to ask you about this particular incident. And I said, well, yeah, you just got that from The Crown. It never happened. It is not the case. Now, we should have been warned because, frankly, the opening sequence was pretty disgusting. It showed the king coughing blood into a loo, spewing blood. Not good. Then we go to overseas tour. Okay, that all looks pretty special. But one of the things which interested me about this picture, because there's a detail having to be so absolutely right. Look at his uniform, look at his garter ribbon, look at all his medals. He was actually talking to a native in Kenya in 1952, and he was addressing him about a Victoria Cross, and in the series he is saying that this native wasn't entitled to that Victoria Cross. So they're talking about medals. Well, I froze the frame, and I was interested to see that Prince Philip himself was wearing a 1953 coronation medal in 1952. Now, you may accuse me of being trivial on this point, but as I say, as they're talking about medals at the time, it's a pity that they couldn't get it right. And they tell us about the enormous budgets they have to get all these details right, and I was rather pleased when I caught them out. But much more annoying than that was the whole episode about the coronation. And this is where documentary makers have come to me and they've said, we want to talk about Prince Philip hating to kneel before the Queen at the coronation. Well, I can assure you I've written a whole book about the coronation, and he couldn't have cared less. I mean, he was perfectly happy to do it. He knew the ropes and the rules and be her man of liege, etc. He was perfectly happy to do it, but they had to make this conflict, and they made a whole episode out of this completely fake thing. And then you get this sort of anxious look of the Queen as Prince Philip goes off on his 1956 tour. And they cooked up a most shocking idea that the Queen, Claire Foy again, finds a picture of the ballerina Ulanova, who actually did come to London in 1956 to dance at Covent Garden. But Prince Philip never met Ulanova. I mean, I don't know whether they were trying to sort of make some diplomatic incident between Britain and Russia, but it's absolutely outrageous to suggest that there was something going on between him and Ulanova and that this would cause the Queen to be upset. Completely cooked up and absolutely shocking. As I say, they do have wonderfully lavish sets and wonderful lavish scenes are produced. I mean, they must have had great fun filming this. We have Prince Philip on his tour, and then we have Prince Philip again as a bearded figure giving he gave a broadcast from New Zealand. Another incident, sort of thing they were doing, particularly in Series 2, is they would take something which did happen, two events that did happen, and then clash them against each other to make something which absolutely didn't happen. So, for example, the Kennedys did come to London in 1961, and the Queen entertained them at Buckingham Palace. So here you see Claire Foy with Jackie Kennedy. And we do know that later on Jackie Kennedy made a couple of spiky remarks about, I don't know, the decor of Buckingham Palace to people like Gore Vidal, who wrote them in their diaries, and these things have all come out years later. Certainly there was nothing said at the time. I'm sure that the evening with the Kennedys was perfectly fine. Then you get later on another scene of the Queen dancing with President Nkrumah in Ghana. And they cook up, out of this episode, a whole scenario whereby the Queen goes to Ghana in order to upstage Mrs. Kennedy. She did not go to Ghana to upstage Mrs. Kennedy. She went for a very sound reason, to keep Ghana in the Commonwealth, which is actually what happened. Now, you may well say that if I'd been making the episode and I'd made an episode about the Queen keeping Ghana in the Commonwealth, that might be rather boring. But the point is, why do you have to make nonsense out of it? Why do you have to make fake situations and fake scenes? And this goes into the psyche of people, and people believe it because it's so beautifully filmed and so well staged. They think it's all true. And they talk a lot about their historical advisors and all the things there. Some of the things in The Crown are true, and quite a lot of them aren't. And then you've got, of course, Vanessa Kirby playing Princess Margaret. And they had a whole episode where Princess Margaret was running the country at the time when the Queen was away. No, she wasn't. Absolute nonsense. And the whole thing was wrong. They sent the Queen Mother up to Scotland, to the Castle of May during this time. If anyone was running the country when the Queen was on her Commonwealth tour, it was the Queen Mother. She used to receive Winston Churchill and so forth. And then, of course, Alex Jennings, wonderful actor, playing the Duke of Windsor. Well, they give him the most amazing Shakespearean lines. He talks about the essence of being a king, and you have him advising the present Queen about how to be a good Queen. Absolute nonsense. The Duke of Windsor was the last person that anyone would have turned to for any advice whatsoever. I mean, I said as much to Alex Jennings when I met him. He looked a bit bemused, but he did actually say, "Yes, I know." He said, "I'm Richard II." At any rate, that's what they did. But the worst thing that they ever did, which was really absolutely shocking and which I think completely unforgivable, was the whole Gordonston episode. The scene opens with some football boots, muddy field, a rugger ball, and then up it comes on the scene Gordonston, and you think, oh gosh, here we go. Prince Charles, they have the rain raining on his bed, he's miserable, he's bullied, and he's pushed around. And so they then have to invent a scenario, and I can just see them back in the office saying this. Okay, boys, Prince Philip must have hated his son to send him to Gordonston. We must find a reason why Prince Philip was sent there. Hey, we must find a reason why Prince Philip's father hated him. So they cook up a scene where Prince Philip punches a boy. In fact, there's a scene where Prince Philip is pushed out of the window, and his half-term is cancelled. well, there was no such incident. I don't think there was half-term. His half-term wasn't cancelled. And nor, by the way, would he have gone to Darmstadt to see his sister during half-term, had there been a half-term and had it been cancelled. And so as a result of this, his sister Cecile says that she has to come to London to go to a wedding, which incidentally she was already coming to anyway. And the true bit, which is awful, is that the plane bearing Cecile, Prince Philip's sister, her 2 boys, her husband's mother, and various other people, and her unborn child, the plane hit a chimney in thick fog in Ostend, and everybody was killed. And Prince Philip was called into his headmaster's study to be told this, and when I wrote a book about his mother, his archivist, Dame Anne Griffiths, said, one thing you must know about Prince Philip is that pretty much the worst thing that ever happened to him in his life was when he was told that his sister had been killed, and also the fact he minded particularly since she was pregnant at the time, and actually the child was born in the trauma of the accident. So they then cook up another scene. They have the Prince Philip character rowing a boat. They have the headmaster shouting at him and telling him that he has to go to Darmstadt for the funeral. They play that up big time, as you can imagine, because Darmstadt was, by that stage, there were a lot of swastikas around, and indeed, if you look at a picture of Cecile's funeral, and not only Cecile, all the other coffins at the same time, there were indeed swastikas about, and Prince Philip did have to walk in that procession. But, may I say, what happened was that his father, in real life, took him out there, and it must have been the most awful journey for father and son to have to do. But in the series, they cook up a scene where his father sees Prince Philip and blames him for causing the accident in which his sister has been killed, and says, it's because of you, boy, that we're burying my favourite child. And I'm sorry, I think that's absolutely outrageous. And in order to make this, I looked at that episode again, and they actually have some very, very grotesque scenes of the accident happening and the plane burning and things. It's extremely poor taste, to say the least. Well, what did they do to Prince Philip's mother? Jane Lapotaire, very good actress again, and evidently people watching loved the mother as she appeared, but I can promise you, having written a book about her, she did not get involved with the film of the royal family. She did not give an interview to a journalist. She did not do any of these things. Nor did you have Prince Philip character saying that he didn't want his mother in Buckingham Palace. He tried desperately to get his mother to come to Buckingham Palace, and the only time he succeeded was when his other sister, Princess Sophie of Hanover, went to see her and said that the Queen had invited her to come, at which point Princess Alice said, Lilibet said she wanted me to come. Will we go this afternoon? And they had to say, steady on, actually, we have to wait until King Constantine's plane is being refitted, because Princess Alice was very deaf and she couldn't hear anything on the telephone, so they couldn't reach her if there was fear that the king, as indeed happened, King Constantine would have to leave rather quickly. So they got Princess Alice out of Greece in 1967 and brought her to Buckingham Palace, where she lived for the last 2 years. Oh dear, I suppose I shouldn't complain too much, because thanks to the beastly crown, I succeeded in selling 2,500 copies of my book on Princess Alice in America, but I'm sorry it had to happen that way round. That is not, by any means, the real Princess Alice. And nor did I like Olivia Colman's portrayal of the Queen. Olivia Colman has a rather sort of cheeky grin and cheeky face, and I think in order to try and give the Queen character some dignity, she's always looking rather surly. So I found that whereas with Claire Foy, if you didn't know the Queen, you were watching as a sort of outsider, you would be very drawn to her, I think. I think Claire Foy made a very, very sympathetic Queen. I think if you saw Olivia Colman, I think you'd be rather put off. She's always looking rather surly and disagreeable. And at the end of the series 3, they had a scene with the Silver Jubilee, and they dressed the Queen up absolutely as she was dressed on that occasion in the pink, with the little bells on the back of her hat and everything. They got that detail absolutely right. But then, look what they did next. Here you have, I think you'll find that's Prince Edward. That is definitely Helena Bonham Carter as Princess Margaret, and Princess Margaret did wear that pink outfit. And then you get this chap, and then you get the Duchess of Gloucester, you get the Duke and Duchess of Kent. But here you get a man in a mourning coat, and this I thought would be interesting for Windsor audiences. He's wearing the collar of the Order of the Garter, he's wearing some medals, and he's wearing a star. 1977, the Duke of Gloucester died in 1974, Prince Henry, the Queen's uncle, and he'd had a stroke in 1968, so he didn't take any part in public life at all. But for this scene, they dressed him up and they resurrected him. What, in fact, they were confused about was that the present Duke of Gloucester did wear a mourning coat at the Silver Jubilee service. He would have been placed the other side of his mother, Princess Alice, in the precedence, because she was senior to him, and he was wearing the collar of the Royal Victorian Order. So here you get poor old Michael Thomas having to come out and dress as the Duke of Gloucester with the collar on, playing basically a dead man. And I would just advise any actor who plays in any of these things, don't overdo it, because Tim Pickett-Smith played Sir Henry Ponsonby in Victoria and Abdul, and I said to Stephen Frears, you cannot have Sir Henry Ponsonby arranging the Diamond Jubilee of Queen Victoria in 1897 when he died in 1895, but in Victoria and Abdul I'm afraid he does it. Alas, Tim Pickett-Smith himself died before the film came out, and I hate to tell you that Michael Thomas also died. He died in March 2019, some months before they showed this scene. So I don't know whether it's like Macbeth, that you shouldn't do it. But, I mean, why do they do these things? You know, I'm sure they thought nobody was noticing, and I hate to be smug, but I couldn't resist catching them out. Let us go back to the real Queen. We much prefer the real Queen to these impersonations of her. And let me just tell you something that Lord Slim said about the Queen. In his coronation broadcast from Australia in 1953, he said, in her person, she is the tie that unites the most diverse races, religions, and forms of government. Through her are linked the great independent nations of the Commonwealth, masters of their own destinies, and with them her other territories at every stage in the march toward self-government and nationhood. He was predicting very much what would happen, but he was also showing the Queen as the symbol in the middle of all this, and of course one of her great contributions has been holding the Commonwealth together. So thank you very much for listening. If there's anybody out there, I can't see you, but I wish you well. Thank you very much.
Hugo, thank you very much for talking with us, and that was really wonderful to have a look at what the royal family have been doing during lockdown, and then also to hear your side of how Netflix have treated the subject matter. But of course, what you didn't say, in your natural modesty, is that you've written a book.
Yes, I'll tell you what happened was that when the first series came out, quite a lot of newspapers wanted to do sort of true and false articles and things, and I kept saying, look, I've worked out what they're doing. I've worked out how they're clashing two scenes together, which did happen, to make something which didn't happen, and I want to explain this. And nobody would let me do it, except my wonderful publisher, Zuleika. I rang them up and said, Tom Perrin, who set up this little company, who did the Quest for Queen Mary, and I said, can I do a little book? And so he said, sure. So then I binge-watched 20 episodes of The Crown with my laptop and noted down all the mistakes and what was going on. And at the end of the day, I fell asleep, and in the morning I woke up again with my laptop, turned it on, flicked on the television, and within a week had the whole thing done for the first 2 episodes, and then produced this little book including series 3. And what I did really was to take each episode apart forensically. I mean, very calmly. I mean, not sort of saying this is a disgrace and things, just pointing out where it was wrong. And it is actually quite a useful little guide, even if you like The Crown. I mean, my daughter loves The Crown, and then she used to ring me up and say, well, did Princess Margaret marry Townsend? How would she know it when she was 16 at the time? And then she would read in the book and see what actually happened. So it's a lot of people say they watch The Crown, start Googling, who is he? What's Tommy Lascelles really like? Was he involved? What about Mike Parker? The Thursday Club and Baron and all these people. Baron, in one episode, is reading out a letter from Prince Philip. Well, Baron had died 3 weeks before. That sort of thing. So I had fun doing it, and so it's just a little handbook, really.
And of course, you can enjoy the the lavish nature and the beautiful filming of the
Well,
series,
this
and
is-
then you can.
Yes, but this is where you have to be really careful because it's so beautifully done, and if it wasn't real people, I would confess that I would enjoy it. I just am annoyed that they've taken real people and produced them in this way. And of course, because you cannot dismiss it as tabloid rubbish. It isn't tabloid rubbish. I mean, it's very dishonest, but it's so convincing that it just goes into your head, and you think, well, that's what really happened, and it is influencing the way people write books and the way things. I mean, even in the Princess Anne documentary, they showed a scene from The Crown, I think, and then. People writing articles say, as seen in The Crown, this happened, or this episode was used in The Crown. It's sort of endlessly The Crown, The Crown, The Crown. I mean, it's hugely successful, and in America, everybody believes that every word is true.
It's very interesting over the years in the festival where we've had talks about the royal family, where you feel that the audience very much enjoys pictures, the stories, and we've had some remarkable people talk on that subject. But one of the things that's always intrigued me is that those people don't necessarily say much that's actually factual. It's often anecdotal and amusing and incidental, and that gives much nourishment to the audience without actually stating fact that is then debatable or not true or anything of that nature.
Well, I have a theory, of course, about royal experts who appear on the television from time to time. Usually the political man has a pretty good idea of what's going on and has very good contacts usually, and people are always, political correspondents are always sort of saying, sort of, the cabinet minister told me this morning, or well, there's a lot of this going on and so forth. The racing man will tell you that the jockey fell off at Lingfield last Saturday. It's nice that his shoulder's fixed in time for him to ride this afternoon at Newbury. The cricketing people can give you all the scores and everything like that. They're all experts, but royal experts, in my experience, they just make most of it up. I mean, in the number of times I've heard them just trotting out old anecdotes or things they've read in other people's books, it's not good. Of course, when it comes to anecdotes, that's of course a very interesting thing, because what did they say? He who knows much there is that he doesn't say, and so forth. And of course, the the great trick is to. I knew somebody who worked for Queen Nor of Jordan, and of course people were always trying to get Queen Nor stories out of her. And she said the thing to do always was to sort of say, rather sort of under your voice, tell a story about Queen Nor, which had in fact appeared in Time magazine 6 months earlier. But you could sort of put it out as if it was a sort of great secret, and that's the way to do it. In fact, you give nothing away at all.
So we've got Series 4 to look forward to.
Series 4 hits the screens on the 15th of November. Of course, it gets closer and closer to the present day. They're not going to go right up to the present day, but they are going to we'll have a lot of Charles and Diana stuff, I'm afraid, in the next series. And of course, it's very annoying that in seasons 5 and 6, which will go on, they've now employed people like Jonathan Pryce and Elizabeth Debicki and Imelda Staunton, all very, very good actors and actresses, so they will no doubt convince the nation once again that what they're doing was what actually happened.
Now, you mentioned earlier a little bit about the Duke and Duchess of Sussex, and of course that event, their wedding for Windsor, was a tremendous day, absolutely fantastic,
wasn't it?
Beautiful.
Yes.
And of course to see the long walk so full with all those excited people, and for the route through the town, and here at the Old Court we had our best day ever on the bar afterwards, and there was a wonderful atmosphere in Windsor. That's obviously now in the past. What do you feel might happen in that situation?
Well, I agree with you. I mean, that was an extraordinary event. I mean, it wasn't just a day either, was it? It was days before. You couldn't move in Windsor. I mean, everything was absolutely packed, and then the whole world, global media descended on Windsor, and it was a fantastic atmosphere. And how it could all have, in a sense, gone so wrong so very quickly is very depressing. I think you'll find that the members of the royal family who are most successful are the ones who support the Queen, because the Queen cannot do everything that she's asked to do, and that's why she has a royal family to help her. And particularly, she's heading towards her 95th birthday. She needs to be helped, and people like our patron, Prince Edward, the Earl of Wessex, is a supreme example of somebody who he and the Countess of Wessex very quietly go about their duties, helping them. They a lot of the things, if you look at them, are not perhaps particularly romantic or newsworthy in the sort of in a particular way, but they are very much appreciated by the people for whom they do these engagements, and they do a lot of good for charity, and they help them, and they engage in all sorts of things. So when they are needed to help the Queen, they will help the Queen. When they're not needed to help the Queen, they can pursue their own endeavours. And Prince Philip is a supreme example of that as well, somebody who always worked out when he was needed, but when he wasn't needed, he was doing his award schemes and his national playing fields and various other things. So when you get this sort of situation with the Sussex, it seems to me that somehow they've managed to, they've got upset and they've upset other people. It's all gone wrong, and it's gone wrong very, very quickly. And it seems to me that somehow they didn't really give it much of a go, to be honest. Didn't give it much of a chance. I don't know what the Duchess of Sussex expected it was going to be like, but the Queen gave them the whole of the Commonwealth to explore, and this is a fantastic thing. And as I was saying in my talk earlier, if I had been arranging their programme, I would have sent them off all over the place. And that Australian trip was a huge success. And the African trip was pretty good until they started talking about themselves. And this is where it goes wrong, when it's sort of me stuff starts happening. And, now they've taken this deal with Netflix, and it looks wonderful, but I don't see it really working, because I don't see how they can deliver. And I'm afraid those companies often get a lot of publicity by hiring and even more publicity by firing. It could easily go wrong. I don't see what they can offer. And it's so much better when the royal family are working selflessly for the good of the nation, rather than for the good of themselves, as it seems to be. Now, they would argue that they found a new way of reaching people. Maybe they have. I don't know. I just think a lot will be asked of them, and they won't like it. A little bit like Peter Phillips, who presumably didn't read his contract carefully and ended up having to do that ridiculous, but by the way, hilarious, milk advertisement in China, which if you want a good laugh, have a look at it. I mean, he must have been deeply embarrassed and thought no one would ever see it. But I mean, it could well be that, that they tell Prince Harry, well, we paid you $1 million or something to do this. We want you to do the following. And he won't like it. He's not used to that. He was Captain General of the Royal Marines, and now he's a childminder in Los Angeles. What will happen? What should happen, of course, is that something will bring him home, some family event perhaps or whatever, and, maybe I don't know that this really can happen, but what should happen in a sense is that he just basically says, look, it's all got totally out of control. He looks absolutely miserable in my view, and I think the sooner he comes home, the better.
Well, of course, their marriage day in Windsor reminds me of another joyful occasion in Windsor with the Long Walk, which was going back to the Silver Jubilee.
Oh, yes.
And I say reminds me because I was quite small at the time, although the day before the events on Snow Hill up by the Copper Horse, I did crawl inside the bonfire, apparently.
Goodness, you were lucky you didn't get incinerated.
Yes. Well, and of course, the Long Walk on that occasion was absolutely packed.
It was, yes.
And the Queen went up the Long Walk to the Copper Horse, and there was this marvellous beacon bonfire. But
yes.
It didn't light, did it?
No, it didn't light. And Major Michael Parker, now Sir Michael Parker, KCVO, he was in control of it. And I think the Queen said, well, you really don't need me here at all, as it sort of, I think eventually did sort of, I think they had to make it take light, didn't they?
I think the Marines threw petrol on it or something like that.
Yes, because it was the first, as you know, of the beacons, up to the Bevis Lordley terraces and things, which are going to go right across the country, giving the great news of the Silver Jubilee. And it was a fantastic occasion. I was lucky, I was actually there at the Copper Horse. It was wonderful.
Brilliant,
yes.
Brilliant. And that brings us back to the Queen.
Yes, well, I think, we are so lucky to have the Queen. She has bestowed a sort of incredible calm over this nation. I mean, be under no illusions, we are living at the tail end of a golden age, and her mere presence bestows something incredible on this country, which we will never see the like of again. And we can't, in a way, because I suspect she might be the last person in history who has gone right through life without giving an interview or telling us what she thought. I think you'll find that will be impossible in the future. I mean, we already know what the Prince of Wales thinks about lots of things. We've heard Prince William and Prince Harry talking a lot about their lives. They've all talked, you know, but the Queen has never talked. And so she has this extraordinary mystique. Must have been a very interesting moment when the Queen realised that actually she gained much more by saying nothing than by saying something. Doesn't mean she can't say it in private, mind you. And of course you have this wonderful situation that if the Queen asks for formal advice from the Prime Minister, she is constitutionally obliged to take it. But if she advises the Prime Minister something, he is not obliged to take it. But he'd do well to listen, because she's a wise lady.
Hugo Vickers, thank you very much indeed.
Thank you for having me.